KSDE building. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have those that are in the building introduce themselves so that we know who's at the table.
Lindsay Graff.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Carrie Haig, Assistant Director of Special Education Title Services team.
Welcome.
And I'm Bert Moore, Director of Special Education and Title Services and Secretary officially for the CA.
Welcome.
And I'm Trish Backman, and I was past chair and have officially handed the torch to Tobias, and I am now representing Special Ed and Title Services as a coordinator.
Very good.
Good afternoon, Tobias.
Go ahead.
Brian Dempsey is here, Assistant Director of SETS.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Is there anybody else in the room?
Kayla Love here. I am the lead assistant on the Special Education and Title Services team, as well as the lead assistant for SEAC itself.
I'm Gail Tripp. I'm senior assistant for Doug Borland for the SETS team.
Okay, welcome.
I am Alicia Nichols, and I am the assistant for Tate on SETS.
Okay, welcome.
That's all of us.
Okay, very good. Are there any introductions that we need to make, Bert?
We do have two new members. I don't know if they're on or not. They are on.
Well,
One is on?
Yeah.
Is it Brooke or Chris?
Chris.
Okay, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Chris Reppett. I'm the principal at St. John's Catholic School in Lawrence, Kansas. And so been a previous special education coordinator for a public school district back in Illinois, but I'm excited to be here and to be a part of this group.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
And Brooke Moore is our other new member, but she has not logged in yet.
Okay, Kayla, would you let me know if that occurs? That way we can give her an opportunity to introduce herself.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so SEAC members, would you take a look at the agenda? I believe that should be in your materials that were sent out by Kayla this morning. Is there any additions or deletions to the agenda for today? And if not, I would appreciate a motion to approve.
This is Laura Thompson. I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
This is Lindsay Graff. I'll second.
Thank you. So those of you that are new to this, Kayla will have a poll that will pop up that allows you to make your vote. And once all those votes are in, Kayla will let us know the results.
Looks like the approval for the agenda has passed. Tobias, you're muted.
So I appreciate that. So let's take a look at the minutes of the last meeting. If you have not had a chance to read those, please scan those through to see if there are any additions or deletions. And I would also appreciate a move to approve.
Tobias, this is Lena Kisner, and I would move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Lindsay Graff, I second.
Thank you. We'll go through the same poll process.
We approve all the minutes that passed as well.
Did I hear results from the room as well?
Yes, they have passed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So let's move on to public comment. Do we know if anyone has requested the opportunity to speak publicly?
I have not received anything at all yet.
Okay, let's go ahead and give them a moment for anybody that that might be listening to receive that public comment opportunity. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. So we kind of informally did our introductions. We've heard a little bit from Chris. Do we know much from Brooke that we might share with the other members?
Trying to find her paperwork. I thought she'd be here.
Okay, well, I will mention that that this opportunity to serve on the SEAC Council is fairly special to me, particularly. I do not have a family member with special needs, and nor do I have my own special needs. My spouse may think differently sometimes. However, the work that this group does is quite special, and it's also I feel it's special that this group requests and requires by the bylaws that 51% of the members either have a disability or have a child with a disability. And what that does, from my opinion, is it brings some realness and some genuine some definite real world experience to this process. So Chris, do you have anything to add from your introduction?
Yeah, now that you said that, Tobias, I am also a parent of 2 children with special needs. So I have 3 daughters. My oldest daughter and my youngest daughter both have Down syndrome. My oldest daughter has a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism. My youngest has Down syndrome and ADHD. So not only do I work within the school, but also as a parent too.
Very good. Well, thank you. And one of the things that we've done with this group is we've worked on a transition document for the IEP process. And I spent 14 years as a classroom teacher. I tell people that I'm a recovering band director. And so during that time, I had many students that had special needs, and I served on many IEP. I sat in many IEPs, and I had several students that were diagnosed with high functioning autism, Down syndrome, that were among the most loyal and some of the most musically proficient students that I've had. And one of those students was able to transition into the Air Force, and he is currently serving in the Air Force in Korea and experiencing a high degree of success where he is. So I was particularly proud when we were able to add the military options to the transition document because obviously that's something that has real world experience and maybe could provide some real world change. So very good. So I appreciate you all being here. So let's move ahead. So we've got a membership report. Let's go ahead and move ahead with that.
This would be an opportunity for any of you members to provide us with any updates that you'd like to share with the rest of the SEAC members.
Do we have anyone that would like to share?
While they're thinking, Tobias, I did find Brooke's information. She's the
Okay.
parent of a child with a disability. She's an associate professor at Fort Hays State University. And she's representing institutions of higher education that provide, prepare special ed and related services personnel.
Okay, thank you.
This is kind of a new item, Tobias, so we can let the members know that in the future, if they want to provide any updates, this would be an opportunity for them to do so.
Very good. So as you are working in your day-to-day and have something that occurs in that day-to-day that is relevant to this group, this is a good opportunity to share that. For instance, if you are representing a particular group and have had some conversations with that group that you are representing, this is a good opportunity for them to use you as their conduit and as their voice for this group. So hearing none, let's move on to the SPP APR 2020 submission. Brian, are you ready for that? Yes, go ahead.
This is Trish Backman, and I just asked Bert, I know I'm sitting as a KSDE member now, but my update would be to get out there and recruit people so that you guys can find somebody who actively is engaged with corrections and education in corrections, because that's a seat that we don't have filled right now. But in our last graduation in December, we graduated an all-time high of 32 students. And that was not only through GED, but also full diploma, as well as we had some who had doubled up and received all 4 certificates through Washburn Tech. So that would have been my update.
Well, outstanding. Well, that is definitely welcome. And I will also mention that we really appreciate the work that you have done in that area as a voice for those in corrections, those juveniles that are working towards getting, like you said, both that GED and that higher education certificate through Washburn Tech. So that is a good drum to beat, so to speak. So if you know of anybody that might fit a role that is both in corrections and has an interest in special education, that person might be a good fit for this group. Okay, moving on. So Brian, are you ready for your presentation?
I am, thank you. And I'll just jump in. I'm here to talk to you today about the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report. I know we put 20 on there, but we're getting ready to submit our 21. So I will kind of give a background of where we are at. So as the letters indicate, this is an annual performance report that is due to OSEP. We submit it, it's due by February 1 of every year. And we are getting ready to finalize and submit our FFY 2021 annual performance report.
Brian, may I interrupt for just 1 second, please?
Yes.
I might, for anyone new to this and anyone that might just need a refresher, I believe that when you first came on, there was a document that has acronyms and that might be helpful to pull that document up as we're going. And I might also mention that those that you are speaking, if you do have some of those acronyms, you might give us a little bit of a heads up on what some of those acronyms are so that we can feel a little bit more relevant.
Thank you. Yes, so to that end, you'll hear us talk, the vernacular is SPP APR, but that's State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report. And that's where we're at in the process, is submitting to OSEP by the end of the month. We will, as a team, internal team, finalize this in a couple of weeks. And then Carrie and I will go through it again, and then Carrie will push submit probably the last day of January, last business day. OSEP then reviews it and then provides us feedback by April. And then there's a 2-week turnaround period where we clarify any comments that they have. And once we do that, they finally review everything. And OSEP is the Office of Special Education Programs. I'm sorry, that's our federal partners. They will finally review everything early summer, and then usually in mid-June, we receive our letter of determination. For Kansas, we've had meet requirements for about 12 or 13 years now. We're really proud of that. They look at a couple of things. They look at the accuracy of our data and our submission, and there's a rubric for that, which we scored 100 on consistently. The other thing that feeds into the level of determination is the NAEP scores, which are the National Academic Education National Assessment and Education Progress. Sorry, thank you. Those we don't control. So just so SEAC members know, last year we scored 100 on what we control, and we scored 60 something, I think, on our NAEP scores, which brought us down. They averaged those scores. We were around an 82, I think. And the bottom line is we were a couple of points from the next down level, which was needs assistance.
I described it as, we met it by the hair of our chinny chin chin last year, or Nate, but knows.
So that feeds into it, and we're aware of that, and what we can control, we control. So we get that in June, and then usually in the fall, I will come back to you and go through our data for the federal fiscal year, that's FFY, for the 21 submission that we're talking about today. So I won't provide you the 21 data. It's not completely final, and the report's not final to submit. I'll just kind of give you an update of where we are. But in the fall, we'll go through and you'll see this. We'll talk about where we had slippage, where we met everything. We'll talk about our level of determination, depending what that ends up being, what is the follow-up to that. And then and at that point internally, we're gathering our data again, getting ready for the next APR or annual performance report. We are in what they call a new package. And this package is FFY 20 through 25. So last year was our first submission of the annual performance report under this new package. So this will be our second submission. So for those of you that have been around, you remember a couple of years ago, a bunch of us came and talked to you about baselines and targets. And for the new members, I'll go through this a little bit. You'll see it. And we set all of those. Carrie and I will talk to you about baseline and targets for 2 indicators today to wrap all of that up. But everything else you've seen, there's a couple indicators we're still using, old baselines and targets. So those are kind of the baseline of what we're aiming for in an indicator. That sets our baseline. The targets are what we're aspiring to. At the end of the 6-year package, you have to finish, or your targets, your goal essentially is to finish better than your baseline or where you started. So you'll see that as we walk through this. So that's kind of a background. So for today's purposes, January is usually kind of an update where we are, anything new that Carrie and I have today, and answer any questions that you might have. Taylor, are you controlling? Okay. And I apologize that this will be in your materials. These came out smaller than probably I would have liked, but I'm going to just kind of scroll through all of our indicators, tell you what our baselines are, what our data was for last year, and then what our target is for this year. And then in September, you'll know more about what our data was for this year. So as you see, indicator 1 is our graduation rate. And that is pretty simple. It's the percent of youth with IEPs graduating from a high school with a regular high school diploma. And that's defined in regulation. It does not include GEDs or certificates. It is a pure diploma. In Kansas, there's one. There's no alternatives. So our baseline was set in 20, so that's 84.54%. And our data was 84.54 because it's the same year we set our baseline. So when you set your baseline, you use the data for that year. Our target for this submission is 81%. For those that might be wondering how and when you determine your baselines and targets, there are two scenarios where you can change your baseline. Either your methodology or your measurement change or your data source change. For graduation, both changed with this package. So our data source changed to EdFacts and our 618 data, and the calculation changed as well. So that allowed us to change. You don't need both, you just need one. The second indicator is dropout. And that's the percent of youth with IEPs or individual education plans who exited special education due to dropping out. This has gone through some changes. And what you're seeing is our baseline that we had. This is an old baseline. Our measurement used to be students with IEPs who exited over all students with IEPs. So when you look at a small number divided into a large number, you come up with a smaller percentage. So historically, this is run in the twos, the high twos. We've gotten down to about the low twos recently. So what you're seeing in this chart are placeholders, and then I'll come back to this at the end. So we changed our baseline and our targets based on a new calculation. So rather than looking at students with IEPs who drop out over all students with IEPs, we're looking at students with IEPs who dropped out over students with IEPs who exited. So those who graduated, transferred out, etc. So we shrunk the denominator. And so for mathy people, you know, we're going to see some bigger numbers. And so we'll see that when we get to what we are proposing for the baseline and targets. But I just want to put that in the back of your mind. Indicator 3 is our state assessment for students with IEPs. It is what it is, what it says. And I'm going to go to this later. This, I wanted to show, part of the reason for putting this together was to show you the amount of work that my colleagues go into as they manage these indicators. And 3 is pretty busy, and we'll see that in a little bit. But this is, there's 4 components, A, B, C, and D. A is just our participation, and that includes the AA is alternative assessment students as well. B is proficiency, and this is just the gen ed, not the alternative assessment. C is the proficiency for students. This is the alternative assessment students. And D is the gap in proficiency when you look at students with IEPs and gen ed students. Okay, indicator 4. This is 2 parts, 4A and 4B. So 4A is the percent of districts that have a significant discrepancy in the rate of suspensions and expulsions of greater than 10 days in a school year for children with IEPs. So this is just, are you suspending kids more than 10 days? And as you can see, for 4A, our baseline is 0. It will always be a 0. It's a compliance indicator. Our data for 20 was 0, and our target for 21 is 0.7. And we'll talk about slippage later as well, or we can talk about that now. So as you go year to year, what OSEP also wants to look at your performance is how are you doing? Are you improving or are you not improving? And if you're not improving, how much are you not improving? And if it's so much, they call that slippage. So if your measurements are 10% or greater, so graduation, for example, is 84%. If you decrease your performance by greater than 1%, that's slippage. And then OSEP requires us to analyze and come up with reasons or why we think that dropped by more than 1%. We would ask you for input. We'd ask our other stakeholders for input. We'd look at data. And as you can suspect now, COVID's a reason on a lot of these slippage statements. When you look at the old indicator 2 data, when your measurement is by 1% or less, then slippage is defined as 0.1% or more of a worsening performance. So graduation rates, for example, you want to go up. So if you're going up every year, even if you don't hit a target, that's not slippage because you're improving. It's only when you're getting worse in that indicator. Dropout is the inverse. You want to drop that rate. So we would look at slippage if our dropout rate is increasing. So 4A, what we did was set a target of 0.7, and we did this intentionally. So as I said earlier, you want to finish your package, so our FFY 25 at or better than our initial baseline, which is 0. So we're going to have to get back to 0 by 25. But we wanted to make sure for 4A, we're allowed to do more than 0. So we put in 0.7 in case we did have some findings, and then that would avoid slippage. I hope that makes sense. 4B is zeros all across. We can't do it on 4B. It's just 0% is the expectation, and that's our target and our data for 20 and hopefully for 21. And 4B is discrepancy of expulsions by race. And then evaluating the policies. Okay. Indicator 5. Least restrictive environment, LRE. Sometimes you'll hear this is kind of a measurement of that if you're working with a district, or if you're a district and you're looking at your data, you might want to look at your indicator 5 to see where your students are. 3 components here, A, B, and C. A is 80% or more of the day is spent inside a regular classroom, so inclusion. B is less than 40% of the day, and then C is in separate facilities or schools. So obviously you want more in A than B and C. So you'll see the targets and the baselines decrease across these categories. So for example, A, the baseline is 70.25%, B is 7%, C is 2.21%. So as you see, we want most of our students in the gen ed classroom. Our data for 20 was 72 in A, 6 in B, and 1 in C. So we're doing good. And then our targets for 21, you can see there, 70.75 for A, 7 for B, 2.19 for C. And you'll see this when we talk, Carrie and I talk about our indicators. We don't randomly set these targets. There's a methodology to that. And we would review these with you when we reset these with the new package. And then I'll go over indicators 2's methodology, and Carrie will go over 17 as well. Indicator 6 is the preschool environments. So the indicator 5 is your 5 to 21 students, 6 is your preschool. Similar, other than, no, this is not similar. I assume it's similar when I was talking about this the other day. Preschool environments for indicator 6 are where you're receiving the majority of your special education and related services. A is that in the regular early childhood program. B is that in a separate, in a special ed class or separate school. And for this package, C is new, and that is in the home. And that was added. So again, as you go through the categories of A, B, and C, you want most of your services and special education delivered with their peers in the gen ed setting or in the early childhood program. So A is at 40% as a baseline, then B is at 37% roughly, and C is about 2%. Again, our 20 data shows our performance, and then our 21 targets are there. We've actually had a lot of work done with early childhood over the last 4 to 5 years with some TA, and these numbers have greatly improved. Indicator 7 are your preschool outcomes. So this is a preschool indicator as well. And these are divided into A, B, and C. And each has 2 measurements. A is about positive social emotional skills. B is acquisition and use of knowledge. And C is use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. Again, the baselines you'll see, so A, B, and C each have 1 and 2. 1 is of those children who entered or exited the preschool program below expectations, how many came out and showed the rate of growth by the time they turned 6 and exited the program. And then 2 is the percent of preschool children functioning within age expectations by the time they turn 6. So 1 is improvement, 2 is did they get to age appropriate. Then our baseline, you can see for A, B, and C, and then our data for 20, and then our targets for 21. So most of the time on these indicators, I hope you're seeing from 20 to 21 that our targets are better than our data for 20. So as we go across the package, we're improving our performance till we get to 25. If they're going lower, hopefully it's an indicator where lower is better, but sometimes you'll see we're going to have some slippage, and we will this year on a couple of these. Indicator 8 is parent involvement. This is a survey indicator, and the baselines are baseline is 78.34%, and our 20 data was 66.5%. And our target for 21 is 78.34. This changed with this package. This used to be a survey we sent out randomly to parents. We went to a census survey this year where we're targeting all the parents. And this is whether the parents feel that they were provided an opportunity to have input in and have parental involvement in their students' education. So this is the positive feedback, not the results. This is 66.5% of the responses last year felt they had input. Indicator 9 is disproportionate representation by racial and ethnic groups in special education. Again, this is a compliance indicator, so you'll see zeros across, and we're not allowed the flexibility like we are in 4A of the expulsion and suspension to put a little bit in there on our targets to cover for slippage. So these are straight zeros. You'll see a random number in these boxes, 6 in that baseline box in indicator 9. These are page numbers. When I created this, I couldn't figure out how to delete these. A little technical. So don't let those numbers throw you off. Indicator 10 is disproportionate representation by disability categories. So this is race and ethnicity when we're looking at different categories of disability. Again, it's a compliance indicator, so it's zeros all across. Indicator 11 is child find. Are we finding students eligible for IEPs? This is looking at our evaluation time frame of 60 days from when the parent consents. Our baseline is 98.4. Our target is 100% across the board, and you can see we're pretty close. Stacy gets frustrated when we don't hit that, but we're doing pretty good.
And those are school days.
Yes, 60 school days from the time the parent consents to an evaluation. Okay. Indicator 12 is early childhood transition. This is another early childhood indicator. This is for the students or young children going from part C, which is the early childhood, over to part B, which is your education setting.
Is that baseline correct? Because this is a compliance indicator and 72% seems awful high. We're missing that part B, C to B transition. We've been in the 99th percentile for several years, so we might want to check that one.
Okay. Indicator 13 is secondary transition. This is ensuring that students that reach age 16, their IEPs address transition and that it's appropriate. Our baseline is 99.8, but our target is 100%, and we do pretty well on this. We run about 99%. I think it was 99.80 in 19 and 99.08 last year. And then post-school outcomes. This is a survey as well, and we hope to transition to a census this year rather than doing a random. And this is looking at students after they've exited and what are they doing? Are they enrolled in higher education, which is A? Are they enrolled in higher education or competitively employed within a year, which is B? Or C is enrolled in higher education or some other post-secondary education or training program, competitively employed, or other employment within a year of leaving high school. So these numbers from A to B to C tend to increase because they're additive. So A is about 48%, and you can see our data last year was 27.4, and our target is 37 for this year. And then, yeah.
Marvin Miller is putting in the comment, baseline was 72% from 2005.
That's for indicator
Was that
12.
for indicator 12?
Yes,
Oh, for 12.
but that should reflect our 2025.
We'll check on that.
For this.
Thank you, Marvin. And I'll correct any mistakes and get those back to Kayla for dissemination to you. Okay, so post-school outcomes is one where in evaluate and analyze some of the comments we received back on our surveys where COVID was an impact. So you saw young adults leaving high school and COVID impacting their ability through health concerns to enroll in post-secondary institutions. The job market, as we all know, got a little tight and some struggled in the job market. Some voluntarily just took some gap time off. And that's what you see reflected here. And that was reflected in our submission with our FFY20. So we're going to look at 21 and see what that held. I suspect it may be somewhat similar. 15 and 16 indicators are due process. Indicator 15 is our dispute resolution hearings, and 16 are mediation. So you see our baseline at 35%, 75%, and then these indicators allow for a range from OSEP. And so for our targets, they've always been 37 to 40% that will have a resolution. So what I put in here for 20 and what you'll see for 21 as well is we did not meet the threshold. So you have to have a minimum of 10 in either category to be measured. And we do not have 10 dispute resolutions, nor do we have 10 mediation sessions, or we haven't had. So we didn't in 20, and we really haven't had that historically. So we'll put our baseline in, which is pretty old as well. We put our target in, which we have the range that hasn't changed either, but we don't have to report out. So even if we have 2 mediations, but they weren't successful, so we're at 0%, it really doesn't count to OSEP. It's not enough of an N size to measure. And that's been pretty consistent. We might hit mediations for the FFY22 submission. We're about halfway through the year and about halfway to 10, so we'll see if that continues. And then indicator 17 is our state systemic improvement plan, and Carrie will talk to you about that in a bit. So I pulled out the indicator 3, our assessment outcomes. And I'm not going to go through these, you can look at them, but I just wanted you to see the details of what they're measuring and what we're looking at. So A is participation. So you're going to see a 95% participation rate, which is required as a target. And you can see on the 20 data, which would have been through the pandemic, that slipped a little bit, I believe, for 19, if I remember right. But every indicator is divided into reading and math assessments for 4th, 8th, and 10th grade. So what you see on the baseline column, the first 3 are always going to be reading on the 3 A, B, C, and D indicators. And the 4th is grade level, 8th grade level, and 10th grade. And then math are the next 3. And that repeats for B, C, and D. So it's all reading and then math, 4th, 8th, and 10th. And then what our baseline, what our 20 data is, and what our targets are. And then D is just on the next page. Same as that as well. And that's our gap. So that's the gap between students with IEPs and gen ed students. Okay, I'm going to take a pause if it's okay. If anybody has any questions from just kind of going over the indicators and looking at some data. And if there aren't questions, I'll go over indicator 2 and then Carrie will go over indicator 17 for new baseline and targets.
Okay, well, as we're thinking up some questions, those of you that I mean, most of us are pretty familiar with Zoom and Teams nowadays, but underneath on the bottom of the screen, there is a button for reactions. If you would like to add something or have a question, there's a button there to raise your hand. I just will ask that after your hand is raised and you've been called on, to remember to lower your hand so that we're not thinking that you still have more questions. If you still have more questions, by all means, keep it up. So Leslie, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you. My question is on the indicator 8 about parents' involvement. Brian, you said that was done a little bit differently this year. So was it sent out to all parents, and does that, and I know that comes through the districts, I think, or does it come directly from you guys?
I believe that comes through the districts. Yes, we did a census survey.
Yeah, and then and so one of my concerns is I've not received one, and I'm an education advocate. So, you know, as the legal decision maker, I would be, so should have been receiving one. And I know that others here have said the same thing. So just I guess that's where I was just curious if the districts send it out at different times, or what you know about how it's being disseminated.
I will follow up, Leslie, and get back to you, and I'll get back to the group as well.
Okay, thank you.
What we might be able to do is ask for and see if there are some accountability measures that we can put in place to those districts, so maybe they can let us know when, or let the KSDE know when that has been done. That way we could check it off a list possibly. So that's a little outside my wheelhouse, but I don't know what is possible there, but it sounds like we need some accountability of making sure that gets done. Lena has a question.
Thanks. Let me lower my hand before I forget. I'll just address what we do locally to Leslie's question. So we have sent out the electronic link to our families and connected it to our IEP system so it can be sent out via email. We have instructed all of our IEP providers to send it out after each IEP meeting. However, this is still a fairly new thing, and I think it's probably forgotten. To be quite honest, we've sent out reminders a couple different times. This is a good reminder to send out one more reminder. But that's how we've managed it locally, is just sending them out after each annual IEP.
Very good. Thank you, Lena. Whitney, do you have something to add?
I'm a general education teacher in Manhattan, Ogden, and a parent of a special needs child. And I did receive an email. Ours came in our district came from like the head special education department, like from our head person secretary. And it was a link to click on and take, but I feel like reminders, because all parents probably didn't take it. I think I probably did, since I'm a teacher and a parent of a special needs. But I do like the idea of reminding them at the IEPs as well.
Leslie, you're next.
Thank you. So one follow-up question about this. I'm also curious if the State Department has been receiving any feedback related to it being a one-question survey. I know that was one thing that we were going to chat about at some point, because I know the reasons for it being switched to a one-question survey. I do know that we've received some comments from families about that, and just curious if much was said in the actual surveys, the responses you're getting. So that's just for something else later.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll follow up on that as well.
And Marvin, did you have something to add?
Sorry about that. I was going to add something, but then I was going to check something first. I'm pretty sure that our district sends it all at one time a year. I did not know the survey was open for an entire length of time, though, more than 30 days. Is it open the entire year?
No. There's a window.
When is the time frame open?
I have to look at our process document to get that to you, because it's already passed.
Okay, so when people send out reminders after IEP meetings, that's why I thought there's like a 30-day window or something that we did back last semester sometime.
There is, but it sounds like that's a local effort to make sure that all parents are surveyed on whether or not they were allowed to participate, or they felt like they were allowed to participate in the process. And it sounds like it's Wichita, or whatever district Lena is talking about. It's that agency then that wants that data on a regular basis. But we do have a window for indicator 8.
Yeah, maybe next time or tomorrow if we have time. I know it's super busy and packed. Or next month, maybe we can find out what that is. So thank you, Bert.
We'll look into it, because you've got good questions and we need to have answers for you.
Okay.
This is Lindsay Graff, and I'm in the room, so sorry I can't raise my hand for you, but I just am curious what the I would hope improvement in return is, since we changed that rate. So if we have those numbers, or in the future if we have those numbers, I just would be curious on that. I know the participation level is not through the roof high, but has it improved since opening that up, and what that looks like?
Which is one of the reasons to do that. So that'll be something I'll bring back in the fall. So we'll analyze that data for this submission.
Okay.
Let me write that down.
I know they got better.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I do recognize that there's an element of local control that must be addressed, but I wonder if there is any push from the top that would create some accountability, or some just another, maybe a level of assuredness that this is being completed. I'm not sure what could be done.
And
there.
again, this is Lindsay Graff in the room, and I was just gonna say, like, we do have to report back how we sent them out, that methodology, if it was mail, like if they got returned back, things like that. So like for our co-op in particular, I gave my providers a certain date in which it had to be achieved by. They had to contact me and tell me all of that information, just so that I would have it readily available, because it seems like we don't do that report till later. And I was afraid I'd forget, and then they forget, and so I set those timeframes. I think really what is concerning for me and what I'm hearing is that to make sure that if it's my providers or who it is getting that survey to the right person at the table, because with that ed advocate comment, that for me is what I would take back is, are we getting that survey information to the right person and ensuring that level even deeper? So I think that's great feedback.
We have a process document for indicator 8. We'll get that out to everyone. And our indicator 8 lead is not here at the meeting right now because we didn't know to have them present. But we might be able to get them tomorrow or at least by April.
Yeah, I don't know if tomorrow would need to be, if we need to get it done by then, but if there is I think one of the things that I understand about parents is if they don't feel like they're a part of the process, that is a definite stumbling block. So the more that we can find a way to ensure that we are taking steps and improving the process as best we can, I think that's a benefit. Does anybody else have anything to add or any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, Brian, let's go ahead, keep going.
Thank you. Great discussion. Okay, indicator 2. And where are we going? So some of these slides are going to look really familiar to those of you who've been around. I presented them a couple of years ago. They're not all in here, but I tweaked them with the data. So as a refresher, indicator 2's measurement changed. There used to be 2 options. Kansas and many states actually chose one of the options that gave us what you saw above, where our dropout rate was about in the 2% to 2.5%. That was students with IEPs who exited over the entire student with IEP population. OSEP with this package said you can't use that option anymore. Everybody has to go to the other option, which is students who leave over students with IEPs who drop out over students with IEPs who leave through graduation or other means. Shrinking the denominator, increasing the dropout rate. So the numbers are similar, but when you change that denominator, it looks differently. However, OSEP said, you don't have to go to that one option that we're forcing you to do on this first year of FFY 2020, but you do have to do it by FFY 21. So when we looked at the data, and I talked to you a couple of years ago, we saw that our dropout rate under the new calculation was about 14.6%. When we went back and we converted about a decade's worth of dropout data under that calculation, we had never had a good dropout rate like that. Historically, we had 2 years, I think in 15 and 17, where we were at about 15.4% under the new calculation. Every other year, we were probably low 16s. We had a year at 17%. And when we talked about it, we felt that FFY 20, back up, indicator 2 dropout is a lag year. So it's not the most recent year. So for FFY 20, it was the school year 2019 to 2020. So as everybody recalls, we closed schools across the country in March of 20 and just pushed through the rest of the year where we were in March. So we felt that that was an anomaly and contributed to why the dropout rate looked really good. And then we had the discussion, do we really want to set our baseline at a dropout rate we've never really achieved before, absent the pandemic, and then knowing the end of the package, we have to perform better than that, even if it's a little bit. And since we have an extra year, we thought, let's just stick with the old way of measuring, and we'll come back this year when we have to use the other option. So that's what we did. So for the 2021 school year data we're using to set the baseline, that's what you see in this slide. That is 16.65%. And I apologize, I didn't put this in here. We did look at all of the data and then we projected out. And so when we talked a couple of years ago, we took a straight line, figured out the standard deviation and what that would be over the course of a package. So we proposed, and this group was okay with doing that methodology. It was based on math, and based on the standard deviation, our year over year change was about 0.27% from 20 through 25. So a decrease of about 1.38%. With the 16.65, when we reran the numbers, what you'll see is we're setting the baseline at 16.65%, and we're going to decrease our targets year by year. Again, with dropout, we want to go down by 0.37%. So that's taken the standard deviation of about, I think it's about 1.45 over the rest of the package, so 21 through 25. So we're proposing a total decrease by the 25 package of 1.48% in our dropout rate. And we think that's doable. I think so. So everything's the same as when we talked about this last time. The methodology, some of the feedback we received over this was we want to make sure it's rigorous and attainable. And I think that's where we landed. I think some feedback was, is this rigorous enough? But when you looked over that 10 to 15 year history, this falls right in that window. And we're going to end up at the bottom of that standard deviation shaded area of improvement, not worsening, but improvement. So when we end up at about 15 something, that's going to be historically about by 25, right in line with where we've performed the best, except for FFY20, the COVID year. So we should end up at the end of this package as well as we've ever performed. Maybe that's clear. I don't know. Okay, so that's where we're at. And then the proposed changes I put in here, these were the same that you saw. The methodology didn't change. So this is the same slide you saw a couple of years ago. We did linear forecasting. And then I changed the data to show we're actually our targets are better than what we had proposed under the FFY20 submission. So all of that will change. So in the fall, you'll see those twos go away. We'll come back in with the 16.75 baseline, and then our data will be what it is. And then we'll do the targets out from there. Okay. Oh, I think I have that in the next slide. Yes. So this is what it'll look like. And then so we're down to 15.17%. And I think 15.2 is the best we've performed over the last decade when you convert everything. So for indicator 2, that's what we're moving to with this submission. It was all clear in my head. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
I don't see any questions. I think you can move on if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. So the next to wrap up the SPPAPR will be Carrie for the changes for indicator 17 for this submission.
All right, thank you, Brian. So if you go ahead and move to the next piece, then I don't know if you can focus in on the chart side of it for now or not, but I'll go through and I'll talk through this. So our state systemic improvement plan is what comprises indicator 17. And as part of our requirements, we're required to have a state identified measurable result that we report on, and we're to have baseline data and then a target for that each year through 2025. And so prior to this new package, we have done that, and we've utilized a curriculum-based measurement, general outcome measure that was focused on reading. And we're proposing to continue that we do that. We talked about that part of it last year, but what we didn't have last year to discuss with you was the actual data results using the new measure. And the now that FastBridge offers a new measure, we now have that data, and we think that one of the reasons that we are really looking at using this new measure that takes us from looking at the percentage of students that perform at grade level benchmark to really a percentage that are improving at a typical to aggressive rate, or a percentile of growth, if you will. So it's really a growth measure. And so we will have, this year, we'll start and use a new established data point from our FastBridge data to do that. And also it'll use the, within each of those districts that we have in our cohort from the MTSS districts, it'll use a fall and spring screening data, and growth rates will have been calculated for each of those students. So in the little narrative that on the right-hand side of your screen, it actually talks about what those growth percentiles are for that measure. That starts with a flat growth percentile from 0 to 15%, a modest one, a typical, and an aggressive from 75 to 100%. So we're using the same, we're focusing on the same measure, but we're calculating it differently. And so what we'll be doing is looking at really how are we closing the achievement gap, and what students with disabilities need to do to progress at the same or higher rates of learning as compared to their grade level peers. And it'll be it's a rate of improvement calculation and a metric that drives the decision making for schools and the teams. And the metric takes into consideration the prior achievement of each individual student to determine the effectiveness of instruction and their interventions. I think the other piece that is important about this shift is that it really embraces the notion of that improvement focus, and that we've received feedback from many stakeholder groups, including this council, that intentionally focusing on a rate of improvement calculation really does help ensure our students with disabilities are not falling further behind their non-disabled peers, that it reflects their actual growth, even if they remain below grade level. And this type of measurement approach really upholds the spirit of IDEA by ensuring that students with disabilities are making progress at a rate that's comparable to or higher than their non-disabled peers. And so that's a little bit of the background to why we're shifting to this, the percentile of growth. So the baseline data results that we have, and what we're proposing is that we use our actual results as our baseline for 2021 as the place to start. That came out to 55.60%. So we discussed about as we're setting our baseline, what are the considerations? And really, since we don't have, typically when you would set a baseline, you would use trend data to inform your forward projections, and we don't have trend data for that. So that was part of the, also the rationale for that, for just going with the 55.60 as our baseline. Also, the state average for this same measure for all students, typical peers, for the same group is 53.53. So, which, if you'll notice that it's actually 2.07% lower than the students with disabilities performed for this. So the other factor that plays into this is that within this cohort of districts, and it comes to, it's not like these are real kids, real schools. We're talking about 3,657 students overall in 10 school districts, of which 529 of those are students with disabilities that fall within this group of kindergarten through 5th grade, okay? So of those, that cohort, the kindergartners with disabilities, when you look at their performance as compared to kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, kindergarten kids and 1st grade kids performed 22 to 26% below the other students, typical peers and students with disabilities. So your higher grades are going to age out essentially of this cohort group, and we're going to have a group of kids that have a lot of rebounding to do and we've just never had that situation before where where we have within the next 4 years we'll have a sizable group of those kindergarten 1st graders as well as the preschoolers coming in who we know have had impacts from COVID. And in some respects, this really shows the impact from the instructional impact of the pandemic on kids. And so that's why we're going with just using that 55.60 as our baseline. Its actual date is where we'll start. For the targets, what we're looking at is going out to, we start with the end in mind. Our end target would be 2025. In 2025, that we would just increase to 56%. And that rationale also then falls back with that our all students rate of growth was 53.53%. And that if we set it higher than that, we'd be setting it higher than our students without disabilities. We don't do that for any other indicators. And it would be pretty arbitrary for that. So if we exceed it, that's great. But what we'll have is just I really would call it an incremental increase between each year. You'll see the percentage goes a little bit higher each year between 2022, 23, 24, 25. Just that. Part of our requirements from OSEP is that these targets, our baseline and targets, have to be ambitious and achievable and rigorous. And we think that the fact that non-disabled peers are performing at a lower rate currently for this shows that they're rigorous. I think it also, and though this is probably this is not a scientifically proven fact, but you would like to think it also shows that having a real intensive focus on instruction for that group of kids during that time period really did make a difference for those kids. But we also know that within these districts, that these are our Kansas MTSS and alignment districts, that they have an intensive focus on those practices around building up and establishing an evidence-based core of instruction, intervention curriculum. They utilize that universal screening, progress monitoring, data-based decision-making, and family engagement as a component of that. And the last year, throughout the last year, the 21-22 school year, what our state training team did was started the use of the MTSS inclusive practices site visit protocol. And what this does is produces data that the building leadership teams and the district leadership teams can use on, it provides them data on the instructional effectiveness during reading and math. So the protocol analyzes the extent to which all students with disabilities are included in the core. It looks at whether or not they have access to core instruction and whether or not they're engaged with their peers and their teachers during that instruction. And so overall, that even though we have our state identified measurable result that focuses on it measures this reading aspect as the work occurs within and the support is provided to those districts from our multi-tiered system of support alignment trainers. They are really holistic supporting the work. So that it's not just reading, it's also math, it's behavior, it's the social emotional, all integrated together. And it goes early childhood through graduation. And through this, the intention is that each student and students with disabilities receive effective instruction and the interventions necessary to improve reading, math, behavioral, and social emotional outcomes. So our evaluation of all this will continue to be utilization focused, as well as the logic model incorporates this, and it's designed, the evaluation really is designed to support decision-making within the classroom, the school districts, as well as our state education agency levels. So our overall improvement strategies, there's one that focuses on what we do within an agency around supporting the overall work for Kansas MTSS and alignment and how it's integrated and supports our overall school improvement, our state work goals, our Kansas education systems accreditation work. And then there's also another aspect of our evaluation that focuses on directly on the building and district leadership team level for that. So that's what we're proposing there, is that we establish the baseline data at that 55.60 point, and then the incremental increases in the percentages, so that then by 2025 it is at 56%. And then at any point in time, if something would happen and we would find out, you know, if we came back and the data looks dramatically different next year, we are able as a state to go back and reestablish our baselines and our targets. And we, just like all the other states, are in this, recovery, I guess, after COVID and seeing what this is like. So we're open to that, to seeing what that is and anxious about that.
Well, very good. Thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions or comments? Marvin.
Hey, thank you, Carrie, for a lot of great information. I just wanted to clarify a couple things that I heard. One, did you say that the students served on IEPs were performing at a higher growth rate than the general population? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, so within these within this cohort, which is within this cohort, the 3,657 students, of which 529 of them are students with disabilities, their growth percentile, that there was a larger percentage of them that were whose growth percentile was at the typical to aggressive percent, that were in that percentile, as opposed to the students without disabilities. Yes.
Okay. So that's good. That's good for us special educators, right? That means we're
That's
doing a good
what-
job.
Yeah.
Okay. The
Yes.
other thing, did I hear you correctly? It said there's like a 20% below past year's pre-COVID bubble, then that's kind of filtering up?
Yeah, so when they went in and pulled out and started breaking down the data by grade levels within these, that the kindergarten and first graders data is 22 to 26% lower than third grader, fourth grader, fifth graders.
Okay, so
Of them utilizing this typical to aggressive.
Okay.
The ones
my
that fall
next-
in those percentiles.
Okay, my follow-up question to that is, and we're gonna see this bubble filter through for the next decade probably as it goes up, right? Is this going to impact the number of parents and students who are seeking special education services then? I mean, these are significant differences from past years. Does my question make sense?
That's yet to be determined. But I think, Marvin, you can assume that.
Okay,
The rate of referrals, I have a feeling, is going up.
right, yeah, and so my next question is, obviously FastBridge was normed pre-COVID. Will that be renormed, or is this something that we're gonna just deal with? Because it seems like it's gonna potentially put a lot of burden on our special education system.
Well, aren't you the thinker?
Just trying to figure out if I should retire earlier than later. No.
Marvin, I was also wondering, so will they adjust the test scores on PastBridge because of the pandemic effect for the early childhood?
Has anyone else heard it? I haven't heard that discussion. If there's a discussion of that at all.
I don't know that there is a discussion. I know my wife is part of in an MTSS program and deals with this FastBridge data a lot, and we're seeing it here in our district. And we're trying, before we kind of looked at what was normal. Well, everything's a new normal now, so it's really hard to. So there's discussion among, I think, teachers. I don't know if it's gotten back to FastBridge or at the state levels of different things, but. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting next few years. And I didn't know if anyone had any ideas or how we're going to manage this, or, I mean, our teachers are doing great jobs, but, if you don't have the early childhood stuff, I mean, that flows through you all the way through. And we got a bunch of young kids, and I mean, it's affected everybody, obviously, so. That's all. I was just hoping you had like a magic wand, Carrie.
Yeah, it's a great question though. It makes me, I know sometimes that there's members of our state training team that do have conversations with the FastBridge people that see whether or not anybody's having a conversation about that.
Well, it is a national issue, Marvin. It's not just relative to Kansas. So I think eventually, if they look at norming every 3 to 5 years, then that's when you're going to see changes in those outcomes. So most assessments have that norming that occurs about every 5 years. I know when I was school psychologist, we would have updates to our assessments for scores about every 5 years through the WISC and the WACE and through the PPVT. Picture vocabulary test. Peabody. So I think we will see that eventually. I think the real issue is what can schools do about it? I mean, as an interventionist, one of the things that we found in my district that I just left is we had a 6-week summer program. And that was provided to all students K-8. And they had a dedicated hour for academics every day. And we saw that that was making a difference for our lower performing students. It was substantial. We also offered an after school 3 days a week. So I think it depends on what school districts do to work on how you get these students more time for learning. Because that's one of the things that they lack and that they have the gap is because they didn't get into preschool. They didn't get into programs. They weren't successful in a remote or virtual format. So these are all things, conditions that I think we as leaders need to consider when we're looking at how we spend our ESSER money for learning loss.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to consider here, but we know the reality is the gap is there. So now it's going to be up to us as educators to determine what we're going to do to address it.
Yep. And I think a lot of districts are using their ESSER 3 funds to try to address that through special programs this summer. I think they've come up with a lot of ideas. My concern is that this may be a, you know, again, the ones that utilize these services, sometimes the ones that need it the most don't access it. And this is going to be a longer bubble than what I think the ESSER funds cover for.
I think you're right.
Ashley, you've got a question.
I was just going to comment, we are really leaning into MTSS as a result of kind of looking at it more globally. So instead of looking at it, because the tendency I think is like, okay, if there's a problem and a student's not learning, then let's look at special education. And with MTSS growing across the state, we're really trying to emphasize looking at our core and examining our data from FastBridge to really understand where all of our students are and intervening appropriately at those grade levels. Individually in each of the buildings and things like that. We're a huge system, so you know it's not an easy undertaking, but I think that what we've kind of concluded is in order to help mitigate some of this, we need to look at it as more of a district-wide issue or our core instruction issue and adjust things there so that we can kind of head off some of the additional referrals. We are looking at about 25% increase in our referrals this year in our initial evaluations. And so we're seeing that and we do feel that, but I think at the same time, trying to put those interventions in place is also helping us to keep that lower than it could have been.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, so Marvin just quoted in the chat, my wife's favorite quote is, "This needs a whole class intervention." So yeah, someone referenced the magic wand earlier, and I think that in many cases we're very lucky in Kansas to have the outstanding network of special educators that we do have, although it'd be nice to have that magic wand. Is there anybody else that has any questions or comments on this action item? Okay, hearing none, I would accept a motion to proceed with these target settings for FFY 2021.
This is Marvin Miller. I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept these set targets.
It's Troy Pitch. I second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. I assume that we have a poll ready for this. And in the room, I'd like to see those of you that are wanting to accept this to raise your hand so we can get a count. Okay, in the room, those of you who would not vote to accept this.
Peer pressure. She's in this. That one.
Okay, we have approval, 100% approval on the online virtual members. What it look like in the room?
100% for in-person as well, Tobias.
Okay, very good. Okay, I would like to follow the agenda and keep up with that, although we are ahead of schedule. I would like to have a 15-minute break. Brooke has joined us in the room, and I would like to give her an opportunity when we come back to introduce herself. So without any objections, I would like to take a 15-minute break. So let's plan on getting back to it at 1:42. Thank you.
Yes.
It looks like we've got the big room back. I realize that 1:42 is an odd time to request that people return. So I think we might give ourselves another minute just to make sure that we've got everybody.
Unless their clock looks like mine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I am using Timex as our timekeeper of choice today.
That's exactly what I have, is a Timex.
Hey, takes a lick and keeps on ticking.
That's what Krista just said.
I do want to thank those that were able to join in person today. I regret that I'm not able to be there, but I know that there is some robust conversations that happen and so much learning that actually happens during the break and during the times away from the actual meeting. So thank you for being there and taking part. So Brooke, are you in a position where you can give yourself an introduction in 50 words or less?
Yeah, I'm waving my arms. I don't know if you can see me.
Oh, I can see you. Very good. Well, go
I'm at
ahead.
the very end. I don't know if you can hear me. Hi, everyone.
Here you
I'm
go.
Brooke Moore. Oh, I do have a microphone right there. Okay. I'm Brooke Moore. It's nice to meet everyone. I had a lovely drive from far west, well, not far west, but Winter, Kansas. And so it's nice to be off the farm and in the big city. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for making the drive. I'm a Fort Hays graduate and I grew up in that neck of the woods. So I love that part of the state, and I'm glad that you decided to spend some time in this part of the state. So Brian, are you ready for your next presentation?
I am, thank you. Welcome
go ahead.
back, everybody. The next part will be shorter, and a lot of it you've seen before for those of you that were here last year. This is about differentiated monitoring and support, or as you will hear us talk about, DMS 2.0, every four-letter word related to audits would probably come out, but that's what it is. So differentiated monitoring and support is OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, monitoring of us. So as we monitor LEAs, they monitor us, and that's what this is about. So the next slides I have presented before, I think last fall. And so the summary, this iteration started in 2016 when OSEP started going from compliance and continuing their compliance, but adding in the outcomes. Some of those we talked about through the indicators as well. So more outcomes driven accountability is what they're going for under parts B and C. So B is us, C is early childhood, and that's KDHE. The next slide is the framework. We've talked about this before, and probably the thing to point out here is at the bottom, there are 8 components contained in there that OSEP looks at, and that when we're doing our self-evaluation, that's what we're looking at. So fiscal management, integrated monitoring, sustaining compliance and improvement, dispute resolution, technical assistance and professional development, data, the SPPAPR, and implementation of policies and procedures. Those are the 8 areas that they look at. The next couple slides are those components broken out into kind of a logic model type scenario where if you walk across as you improve your systems, then you get to the intended outcome. So they've done this for those 8 components as described above. So there are 8 components, and some of them are on the same slide, like integrated monitoring and sustaining compliance and improvement. So Kayla, I think I'm not going to go through these, Tobias, unless somebody wants to. I know there are some new members, but I think they can go through them. But if they have questions, certainly stop me and ask me. They have developed protocols that we have access, that we have, and so we've used those in kind of our self-assessment phase, and that's kind of what we're in. So Kayla, if you keep going down. So here's what this looks like. So they call it phase monitoring. I think they're developing different terms. So this started a couple of years ago, and after each visit, so OSEP is learning as well. So LEAs, we, OSEP all have capacity issues. So they're learning lessons as they're going through this and kind of tweaking this as they move along. But we're still in 3 main phases. The first phase is about the document request and protocol interviews. So about this time, or probably closer to spring, summer, they'll start looking at our website and looking what they can find, what they can't find. They'll gather what information they have, they'll review it, and then they'll start asking us for some document request or where that information is located. And then about 5 months before their phase 2 engagement phase, I think is what they're calling that now, they'll send a document request for information to us. So their on-site visit, back up about 5 months, that's when they'll start talking to us about filling in those gaps that they can't find on our website. And then about 4 months before their on-site visit, they'll do some targeted interviews with state staff. And I think they're doing those virtually. States talk about, those are really driven by what they're not finding on the website or what they're not seeing in the document request. So it does vary state to state. We've heard a couple states talk about it, and one state, the focus was on their fiscal team was on the phone with them for about half a day. And another state, their fiscal team wasn't on the phone with them at all. So it's kind of what they're seeing on your website that drives those targeted interviews with state staff. Phase 2, next, Kayla. This is the on-site virtual visit with us. So they will come, I don't think they're doing virtual. I think it will be on-site where they will come and talk to us and talk to some stakeholders. And they'll do that for, I think they're looking at about a week at a time. So when they schedule this with us, and we'll get to the calendar in a minute, we'll target a week in the month that they're coming out and set up those visits. They'll probably visit us, probably look at urban district to rural district, is what they normally do when they come out. So that happens. And then phase 3 is the closeout and follow up. That's kind of the, we expect about 4 months after their on-site visit to receive the report. And over that next year is no different than monitoring an LEA. It's the corrective action plan and then completing that within that time frame. So those are the 3 phases. And it always makes sense when I put this together until I start talking. Then I think, why didn't I put this slide at the beginning? So the next slide, Kayla, is after phase 3. Phase 2 is our engagement. So this is where you start backing up those 4 and 5 months. So Kansas is in cohort 2 under team C, and our on-site visit phase 2 engagement is September of 2024. So almost, well, not quite a little more than a year and a half, a little less than 2 years. So if you back up those 4 and 5 months, so about April and May of 2023, so a little over a year from now is when we expect OSEP to reach out and start asking for information and then setting up interviews. And then they'll set up time in September of 24 for their on-site visit. And then we expect probably around January, our report. That's the goal. These dates have fluctuated, like I said, after every visit. So this was a lot earlier and they've really been pushed out. You can see some of cohort 3s in 2028, I believe. We've always stayed in cohort 2. The dates have gone out a little bit. I think what they were, so there were rumors, Whenever you get monitored, I'm sure LEAs talk too. When's the state coming? Some states were moved to different cohorts, so we wondered if that was happening. I think when you sift everything out, they're trying to line up their B and C visits at the same time. So I think it was just coordinating the OSEP staff to come out. So they'll do their B and C visit for Kansas in September of 24. So we've always stayed in cohort 2. That got pushed out a little bit. So that's where we're at. So what we have been doing is we developed working groups around those component areas to start a high level just gathering of information. And now we'll move into a small team to really start putting that together. And then we're talking with stakeholders over the next year or so, reviewing with you what we have, reviewing with you what OSEP is looking for, the language differences. So Leslie will be familiar with this term. Education advocates is what we talk about. They talk about surrogate parents. So it's getting stakeholders on board with when OSEP asks you about this, this is what they're really talking about in Kansas. So if you hear this, this is the terminology you can use for us, and they'll understand it's the same thing. So that'll be an ongoing deal. So the small group will start putting everything together, doing that, looking for gaps, what's low-hanging fruit we can work on in the short term. There's going to be some things, there will be gaps that aren't low-hanging. The feedback from OSEP has just been, that's going to happen everywhere. If you know it, if you have a plan in place before we get there, that's the best. We still might identify it, but we know you're working on it. Basically, ignoring gaps that you're aware of is probably not the best advice. So that's what we'll be working on, and probably I would propose I come back in September to this group for an update. If you haven't heard from me before then, and I was looking at Bert, I'm sorry. So that would be okay. So that's up to you guys as you set the agenda, but I would propose in September, I talk to you again about SPP APR, where we landed, and then DMS 2.0. Are there any questions? I hope I caught you up on time a little bit, but that's the update for today.
Very good. Do we have any questions or comments?
Only thing I might share, Tobias, is that the Special Ed Advisory Council will be an integral part of the differentiated monitoring, and they will want to interview members of the Special Ed Advisory Council. They also told us that they will be working with the PTI, which is Families Together, and sending questions to them about working with the state and any issues that they're seeing. So it's going to be a comprehensive process, and it's going to involve quite a lift on the part of all of us, but most things are filtered through the Special Education Advisory Council. So we want to keep you abreast of this and keep you informed.
Well, very good. My ears perked up a little bit when you said the interviews of the members of the council. So I hope that the other members also kind of pique their interest a little bit. So very good. I do have one question, Brian. Is there some sort of an internal audit process where that small group goes through and makes sure that they have the things in order for themselves, or is there some sort of external test group that can come in and do any kind of mock audit?
So both. So part of what we're doing internally is a small group will gather everything and then reach out to the larger groups. So they're kind of on pause for now unless we need information or clarification. And then I'm sure there will be people in the staff or internally that can look maybe with some outside eyes. The other thing, that's a great question. We have reached out to some external groups to either run some mock interviews or review some of our data. National TA providers that have experience with this and can help us identify gaps as well.
Very good. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments?
A quick question. This may be kind of silly, but looking at the calendar. So do we have relationships with any of these other states who've gone through this, so we can I mean, I don't know if that's useful or not.
Well, yes, we do. And so we do, so nationally, as we get together, there are conversations that occur informally. So this is talked about at some of our TA meetings and meetings as well. So some of these states that have been through it have shared their experience and what they've looked at. We did have a breakout in Kentucky when we were there. And that's where you heard just different from each state, where the one state spent half a day talking about money.
Gotcha, okay.
So yes, they are reporting out, and OSIP is pretty open and wants this to be transparent as well, so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cadre, they had a session.
Kansas has a great facilitator from the federal government. We're very happy with Dwight Thomas, who's assigned to our state to provide technical assistance. We also work with Wayne Ball, Alina Lincoln, Janet Rossborough, the IDC Center, which is the IDEA Data Center. We work with folk from there. We work with the National Comprehensive, what's SI? NCSI.
National Center on Systemic Improvement.
Thank you. So we work with the Systemic Improvement Group out of NCSI. We have TA providers for each of those that reach out and contact us on a regular basis. So we stay active because we want to be proactive in this approach. We have nothing to hide, so we want to be sure that we're transparent. And if we have any needs, then we're going to be very open about getting those needs corrected. So the whole process is improvement, because ultimately it's about improving services for students with disabilities. It's not about whether the state dotted the I or crossed the T. It's whether dotting the I and crossing the T made a difference for educators and children. So I always look at it as a positive approach when you're monitored, because then you find out what you're doing that's not working, or what you need to start doing that you're expected to do because it's good for education.
That's very well put, Bert. I might also add that in my experience with the Department of Education, they give you the rule book and they give you the playbook. All you have to do is just fill in the gaps. So I appreciate all the work that's being done at your level to make this happen. I know that many folks would see an audit as, like you said, a stressful thing, but I would echo what Bert said about it's an opportunity to identify best practices. It's an opportunity to learn some best practices from other states that those officials at the Department of Ed have learned. So very good. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Bert, would you like to go ahead with the SEAC annual report?
I would be very happy to. I spent many hours on this. I did not like the way we were formatting the prior report, because it made it look like we were working on all of our targets at every meeting, and we were not. So I reframed the outcomes that SEAC has and tried to target the dates and the topics that we covered, and we'll get to that in a minute. But as Kayla brings this up, and she finds it, I think it says SEAC annual report.
Oh, there it is, right in front of my face.
Ta-da! So if you want to move that forward. And we'll get full screen here in a minute, or however we're going to run it.
I just have it pulled up in the document.
So we always list our state board members. We have their mission, vision, motto, success, defined, and outcomes. And that's pretty standard for the annual report, because it kind of guides the work of our whole agency. So you can go to the next page. So when you receive this, if you haven't received it yet, I hope you have. You'll notice that it's for last year, and then it is a summary of what SEAC worked on and the accomplishments that we made, or we felt that we made last year. So here's your table of contents, and you can move on. Notice those acronyms, they're there. So keep going. So then I do a secretary's report where I just talk about how we want to work with SEAC to ensure that we're engaging stakeholders on topics related to serving students with exceptionalities. in Kansas, for you new people, we talk about students with exceptionalities because our regulations require us to provide IEP services for gifted students. So we not only,
Bert?
yes,
I hate to interrupt you, but those of us that are zooming in are unable to see the full screen.
well, we're gonna work on that, aren't we, Kayla?
Okay.
She's getting it.
Thank you.
All right, we'll wait till Kayla's ready.
It's showing on the monitors that are here in the room, Tobias.
Okay, if we just try it again. We had just a small vertical line showing up on my screen. There we go. Thank you. Proceed.
The magic of technology. So this kind of just does an introduction for the annual report that talks about what motivates us and the focus for improving supports for our students with exceptionalities. We talked about meeting virtually for last year because that's how we met. We didn't have face-to-face meetings, which were requested, and that's why we scheduled them this year. But continue moving on. And you can read that at your leisure. Then we talk about the major responsibilities of the SEAC, and it's to advise, consult, and provide recommendations to the Kansas State Board of Education regarding matters concerning serving students with exceptionalities. This comes from the national language about what the Special Ed Advisory Council is designed to do. And so you'll see that we do monitor and provide supports for IDEA as outlined in our bylaws. And then these are our advising roles in the bullets. So you advise the state education agency, which is us, KSDE, on unmet needs within the state in the education of children and youth with exceptionalities. You comment publicly on any rules and regulations proposed by the state regarding the education of children and youth with exceptionalities. You advise us in developing evaluations and reporting on data to the secretary under section 618 of the Act, which is our 3 to 21 services. You advise the SEA in developing corrective action plans to address findings identified in federal monitoring reports under Part B of the Act, and that's what could come from the DMS on-site, because we could have corrective action. You'll be working with us on developing those plans. You advise the SEA in developing and implementing policies related to coordination of services for children and youth with exceptionalities. And you advise on the education of eligible students with disabilities who have been convicted as adults and incarcerated in adult prisons. So you're going to notice these later, and we'll get to that when we get to our targets. But then we talked about having 5 meetings. One of those was a 2-day meeting. And then the next page, we get into the Kansas State Board of Education. We reinforce the vision and the mission of the state board. And then we have our goals. So our goal overall is to advocate for the educational systems that achieves excellence, equity, and lifelong learning for each student with an exceptionality in Kansas. And then we have our belief statements, and those are that we're going to be in partnership because partnerships increase collaboration for better services. Visionary leadership is essential for appropriate services to meet the needs of each student. Innovation is essential to the process of lifelong learning. All child service systems must be provided in an integrated and collaborative manner. And education is an evolving process that requires innovation, continuous growth and evaluation, and the needs of each student must be met. And we highlight that because that is kind of our central theme. Then on the next page, we have, I think we skipped something. Do we have the Kansas? We have Secretary's report. I'm on the wrong page. Keep going. So now we have our membership listed from last year. So this was the 21-22 membership. And we put in here the council member appointment when it expires, the representation, who they represent. Meeting the majority means that you are a person with a disability or you have a child with a disability between the ages of birth and age 26. The state board region seems to be pretty important to our state board members to share the representation across the state. So when our selection committee meets for looking at members, we call it the membership committee. We have to include the majority requirement, and we also want to be sure that if we have any state board regions that do not have members, that we start there. And then if they're a voting member, we say yes. And then we have contact information, and we'll just run through that quickly, Kayla, so people can see that list from last year. We had quite a bit of turnover. And we filled those slots. We currently have 2 positions open. One would be for Department of Corrections or persons that work with correctional facilities. The other would be a business that works with vocational rehabilitation. I believe that's listed there somewhere as an open position. We have our ex officio members. Those are members that are attending, but they're non-voting. We felt that their roles were important enough to make sure that they had a voice here at SEAC, and we just added, we don't have it on here, but we added the school for the deaf, hard of hearing, and the school for the blind, visually impaired. So this year we've added those. And we've never had a Senate education chair or designee or House education chair or designee that has attended our meetings since I've been working with SEAC all the years that I've been engaged, which is currently in my, I guess this is my 3rd year, finishing out the 3rd year, or maybe it's my 4th year, I can't remember. And then I had 8 years on SEAC back in the 90s, early 2000s, where I was a member. So you notice that we talk about members have to meet that full majority. We have to have at least 50%, 51%, I believe is what we talk about, where they have a child with a disability or they are disabled. And then we have the non-voting members. So that gives you the last year's membership list. Continuing on, we have our council leadership. We talk about our chair being elected last year, and that was Tricia. Then we go into the operational standards. These were our meeting dates and how we met, and that'll change this year because most of these will be hybrid. And then we talk about those meetings and where people can go to our website. So this is where you see the link to the website for any of you that want to go exploring. It's right there. And the next page. This was our accomplishments. We generally have just a summary of what we feel like we generally accomplished. And so this is the bulleted list. We'll share this with the state board this afternoon when we provide this report to them and ask them to approve it. But you'll notice that we participate in target setting. We review that stakeholder feedback on the SPP APR results. We approved the targets for the 20 to 25 SPP APR, collaborated with teacher licensure team. We have them meet with us quite regularly, as most of you know, if you've been a member for any length of time. We collaborate or provided feedback on teacher licensure team on the new substitute teacher license, facilitated a joint meeting between SEAC and the state ICC, which, by the way, we're going to try to coordinate in April. They did not put this on their calendar for this year, so that's going to be missing. We normally do that in January, but they forgot to put it on their calendar to have this combined meeting. So we're going to have to try and figure out how we can do that. And then we discuss legislative bills. We normally have Craig Nineswander come, and he talks about the bills that are up there that might impact or affect students with disabilities, students with exceptionalities. We created a subcommittee chaired by SEAC Vice Chair, and that had to do with the graduation task force. We had a committee that actually met, part of the graduation task force with Trish chairing that committee to make sure that they didn't forget about students with disabilities in particular. We provided feedback to the state board on legislative considerations. We talked about serving students age 22 who had missed out on transition services when schools were closed. And we also encouraged them to try and recruit our youngest and brightest students to pursue an education career. We reviewed the work of the Mental Health Advisory Council. We reviewed the ESI regulations and data and provided feedback on TA. We received information on federal stimulus funds. That would be the ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funds. We reviewed the TASN Administrator Survey regarding administrator perceptions of TASN. And then we celebrated Kansas receiving a meets requirement for 2019, SPP APR. Now we get into the newly formatted areas of focus. So you'll notice that we have 6 of them. So we have the priority area 1, which is advise the state education agency of unmet needs. So we have the 1.1 on awareness. This lists when we did that. We talk about the topic, we talk about who provided it, and we have the date then of when that occurred. Then we promote the role of SEAC functions to the legislature, other advisory councils, committees, parents, and organizations. You'll notice the list of those that follows. Then for 1.3, evaluate the working conditions of special ed teachers and study relevant issues, including licensure and endorsements. And then you'll see the list of when we did that and who provided it. The 2.0 area was comment publicly on any rules and regulations proposed by the state regarding the education of children and youth with exceptionalities. That 2.1 was study and provide comment on proposed federal and state laws. And then you'll notice what we did there. Priority area 3 was developing evaluations and reporting on data to the secretary under 618. And then we provided the oversight of implementation of those federal and state special ed laws and regulations. And we'll see that list. There are just a few things we did in that one. And then assist in the dissemination of information there of early childhood and secondary transition. Then 3.3 was analyze the data on the education progress of students with exceptionalities and make recommendations. 3.4 was as stakeholders assist in the interpretation of Kansas data and reporting to the public and U.S. Department of Education. A lot of SPP APR in there. Next, area 4 was advise the SCA in developing corrective action plans to address findings in any federal reports. So 4.1 was to the Office of Special Education for focused monitoring. We met requirements, and then we introduced the DMS where they're going to be monitoring us. 5 was the advise SCA in developing and implementing policies related to the coordination of services. So enhance school, family, community partnerships by encouraging and developing coordinated programs and services. And then 5.2, improve communication and collaboration between SEAC and SICC councils to enhance services to children and families in Kansas, which I want to be able to fill out for this year. So we're going to arrange some sort of a meeting. It may have to be the leadership and a couple of members, but we're going to get that in this year. But there you have it. 5.3 was promote and enhance the blending of services between special and general education, including federal, state, and local programs. So that would be Title I special education. These were reports we received. 5.4, enhance the Kansas assessment system. That calls out those specific assessment indicators in the SPP APR. And then 6 was to advise on the education of eligible students with disabilities who have been convicted as adults and incarcerated in adult prisons. I had to put a note here. That's one we did not cover last year, and I wasn't going to lie and say we did. So I put on there that we're going to cover that either today or tomorrow. And I think it's on tomorrow's agenda. So it'll be 111, but we were going to initially do it today, but because of the short agenda, we put it on tomorrow. And then we have our list of acronyms, the beloved acronyms. Only a couple. And then contact me for more information. So that's going to be our annual report. If you all feel comfortable with that and want to approve that, that would be fine. If you want time to look it over, that would be fine too. But we will ask the state board to approve this, and then we need to make amendments in it, we can.
So Bert, this is Tobias. Do we have, this isn't an action item for us today, correct?
I don't know what we have on the agenda.
It's listed as an information item.
Yeah, it's information.
Okay, very good. Well, I would suggest that anybody that's new to SEAC or, relatively new, this is basically like a who's who and the what's what of what we do. And if there is an area that speaks to you particularly, mention something to Bert or to Kayla. And that there's a reason that the membership committee is made up of those individuals. There's a reason that Trish Backman was put on the task force for the graduation, because those were things that they felt dear about. And so if there is something that speaks to you specifically, reach out to Bert and Kayla and see if we can get you involved in some of those areas. But Bert, thank you very much for that wonderful overview. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that draft?
So Tobias, I did have a comment on it. I know Bert said there's an area that we didn't address, and it was with the Department of Corrections. And being in that setting last year, I will tell you, we did not address that because they would not allow us in because of COVID protocols that were still ongoing, and no outside visitation was allowed, even with some of the families. So that was the first place they wanted to reach out besides outside agencies. And so now that that door has been opened, we're going to get to go do more of that this year. But the only reason the agency didn't address that is because it wasn't allowed.
Thanks.
That's good information. I hope that verbiage might make its way into that report.
I think it might.
Yes.
You know that.
We do have a comment on the chat.
Yeah, so Melanie Haas, the new board chair, this is according to Marvin Miller, and Jim Porter is the new vice chair elected this morning. So very good. Thank you, Marvin, for sharing that. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to turn it back over to Bert for the next item on the agenda.
We want to honor Trish for being our chair for most of this year and being the chair-elect last year. She's been an integral part of the Special Advisory Council. I mean, in a way, when we hired her, we knew that it was going to take away that accountability for the correctional facilities from a perspective of representing them, but she'll get to continue to monitor within those organizations. So she'll still be working in that platform, but it does take away her ability to be a member of SEAC by being a staff member at the Kansas State Department of Education. So Trish, we really want to thank you for the leadership you provided, because you took us to great places with that graduation task force.
Well, I look forward to continuing the work here within the agency, but I most appreciate the fact that we work together so much as a team, and the information that we bring and the collaboration that it allows people in the field and parents of kids who have special needs to be able to have a voice that's heard at a very high level. And I think that making sure that they have that seat at the table is so important. So it's been an honor to serve on this committee.
May permission to speak?
Go ahead.
This is Troy Pitch. I would like to move for a resolution acknowledging the contributions from Tricia Backman. I have the wording if you would allow.
Please go ahead.
I move that the Kansas SEAC recognizes Tricia Backman's achievements and her contributions to the education of exceptional students in our state, and specifically to the SEAC and its members, and expresses its appreciation and gratitude for those contributions and wishes her well in all the years to come, with many members looking forward to her continued interest in and support of exceptional students in Kansas.
Thank you very much. I tell everybody after you've read the book Good to Great that SEAC is my hedgehog. So special ed is where when I looked at options, I told Carrie Haig I have to come work with sets because that's what I do. 25 years, I will retire doing special ed. So I look forward to continuing the work. Thank you so much, Troy. You can't see it because I've got a lot of light behind me. I went from the correctional setting with razor wire to windows. And so I'm not stepping away from the windows for a while, but that's why I look like I'm under investigation and I'm dark and that's okay. I'm going to take the windows, but thank you very much. It means a lot to me. You got me crying.
Well, it was moved by
There is a
Troy and
resolution on the
seconded by
table.
Marvin. We do have a motion on the floor, so I think that we need to make that, finalize that. I don't know if Kayla has a poll for this, but I would certainly ask that anyone unmute themselves that would like to vote. And if you, we do have a poll. Thank you very much. So those in the room, if you'd like to vote for that motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Same sign.
I think I didn't say it. I raised my hand.
Very good. Well, Trish, on behalf of the other members, I want to truly thank you for your leadership and for your representation on this board. And congratulations on the removal of the razor wire and the addition of windows. That's something I hadn't thought about until you mentioned it.
I think I saw somebody in the comments ask if I had been incarcerated. I have not. My husband did 32 years there. So we as a employee, so we do say he did a life sentence and that I bounced him out when he retired. So, but neither one, our love stories met in prison, but it was, we worked there. So that's the best part of the whole story.
Very good. Well, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I want to clarify.
Very good. Do we have anything else, Bert, from your end?
Not for today, but we will tomorrow. We have breakfast at 7:30 for those of you that can be here with the state board. We'll also have the leadership at KSDE in attendance. It's here in room 509. Kayla has planned a great gala for you. She has food and drink, and we have continued to ask for more and more of that as people got lined up for our Division of Learning Services for some of those folks to come down and meet and greet. We have 4 new board members that have just been sworn in today. I guess they were sworn in whenever, but they're at the meeting today. And so 3 new ones. 3. I want to be sure I get it right. I think there's 3. Yeah, there's 3. So we will have an opportunity to meet and greet with them as well as the returning board members tomorrow at 7:30. And then this meeting will start after we conclude the breakfast.
The online part.
Yes, at 8:30. Yeah, Kayla wants everybody to know it'll be 8:30.
Okay, very good. So 8:30 will be the report time, I suppose, for those of us that are meeting virtually.
Yes.
If there's nothing else, I would like to make sure we thank our sign language interpreters, Rachel and Tanya. We also should make sure we say thank you to Kayla for the wonderful work that she does behind the scenes, getting things going. And so I would like a motion to adjourn if no one has had anything else.
This is Lindsay Graff. I make a motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
They don't want to leave Tobias. They want to keep going.
This is Lena Kisner and I'll second.
Very good. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. And by the way, in the chat is the text of the resolution that Troy had made the motion on. So, and that was approved. So let's see the poll. And those of you in the room that move to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. while we're waiting for our poll to come in. Again, tomorrow at 8:30, if you are able to attend the reception and the breakfast, it'd be wonderful to do so. So thank you very much. I have nothing more for you. So thank you very much for attending this meeting today.
Thanks, Tobias.
No, they sent letting us know, be aware, do not.
Bert, are you still there?
I'm here.
Hey, I know it's been probably 3 years since we did the breakfast. Do we have any talking points, or a lot of people probably have never gone to these?
I think it's an opportunity to introduce yourself to the board members, especially the new board members, if you're at one of those tables, and have a conversation with them about what SEAC does. And just to get them some idea of the Special Ed Advisory Council, if you need to look at the talking points that are in our annual report, we're going to present those this afternoon to the board, but they probably are not going to have enough time to remember all that. So I think just talking about that we're here to support the state board and the initiatives of the state board because we follow their mission, their vision. And is there anything that they would like for us to be reviewing that we could report back to them? Because I did that one time and we had them ask us to investigate autism. And so we brought 4 speakers in and we did quite an event on autism and provided them with a report which clarified things for them finally. So I think that's the other thing is if they have any ideas for us